DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Mordenkainen's Lost Notebook, a collection of spells, eldritch invocations, magical items, and the Great Wizard's thoughts on the Vistani. Mordenkainen's Lost Notebook, currently on sale for $9.95, was written by R.P. Davis, Scott Bean, Jeremy Schultz-Arnold, Christopher Walls, and Ashley Warren. The cover art is by R.P. Davis and was edited by Ken Karkas. What are we getting here specifically? Well, you get a collection of spells, magical items, eldritch invocations, and lore on the Vistani. But not just lore on the Vistani. A lot of the spells, magical items, and the eldritch invocations all come with experts from either Mordenkainen himself or Ashley's character from her Barovia campaign, her warlock, who is in current possession of the tome. The spells here are a collection of interesting and unique. I like things like the adamantine wings. A great imagery. When I first read it, I thought it was just a fly spell with some extra flair. And then you can spin the wings and throw blades out with them, which I thought was a really inspired idea. There's a lot here to love, and each spell is kind of interesting in of its own. I love the idea where you've got a section of lore attached to each spell, where it came from, where Mordenkainen learned it from, or how he came across it, or what its use might be. He seems to have an incredible distaste for anything necromantic, but still manages to write down some truly gruesome things, and I'll get into that later. The Eldritch Invocations, there's not a whole lot of them, but what is there is kind of gives a better flavor for certain Warlock builds. Now, going back quickly to the spells, there isn't anything that I would call terribly broken. Some of them border on the more close to that edge, but I don't think anything is definitely breaching that point. And all told, you get quite a lot. I think it's 61 different spells that you're getting as like total, which is a great addition to any D&D game. But these can be as rewards. Wizards who are trying to find magical items, or you want to give a reward to a wizard, there's not much better than a new spell. There's a great feeling knowing that this spell was specifically picked out for this character. Here you go. There's something interesting here. There's something different. It's not in the Player's Handbook, not in the Dungeon Master Guide, not in Xanathar's. This is something for you. Here you go, player. A reward that only you have in the world. Or maybe there's only a couple of copies. Or to use these against your players. Your players are used to seeing a fireball or a lightning bolt slung at them. Why not do something like Arcane Turmoil and rip a spell slot out of them? They'll never see that coming. They won't understand it. Makova has a great video on why villains shouldn't have the same abilities your players do, and these is a really good ripe hunting ground for that. Moving right along to the magical items, there are a lot of things here, and a couple of Mordenkainen's kind of collection of things. There's a really great one in there, Mordenkainen's Shaver, which basically just shaves your face. It can't do any damage to physical physical bits, but it can just give you a nice clean shave. I imagine some intrepid adventurer with greater imagination than I will figure out some way of using this thing in combat. Going on from there, you have a collection of items that are really interesting. They kind of remind me of the materia slot system from Final Fantasy VII, except these are kind of like one-time use style things. You slot them into a magical item of anything, really, and they gain a temporary benefit as their primary use. Things like adding a fire damage, or things like conferring advantage for a set amount of time. A really interesting idea is that way you can grant these things and have temporary bonuses, or here's an emergency, whack this in quickly. I love this idea. It's a really clever thing to put in. Now, I will say this is the spells here aren't the majority of them aren't new. They are rebalanced for 5th edition. They are coming from, a lot of these are coming from things like Complete Mage or the Wizard Spell Compendium from earlier editions, so that they can be ported over and shown, here's how these things will work in 5th edition, and you don't have to worry so much about trying to convert them on your own. But moving right along to the final section, which is all about the lore of the Vistani. Here is where kind of I was reading for so long, and I really love this. The Vistani are a group of travelers that travel through Barovia, essentially. And they are the only people who can move freely between it due to a thing that happened within the past of that land. There was a deal struck at some point that meant that they were the only ones allowed to move. If you've seen Dice Camera Action, you probably know what this is, or if you've played the Curse of Strahd campaign and actually paid enough attention in just the right area and got the right books. It's kind of like you might not know of this stuff, so I'll leave it vague there. But suffice to say, the lore of the Vistani themselves isn't expanded on very greatly within the Curse of Strahd campaign module. It's kind of the only spot where they appear, but they're really interesting in terms of the way they do things. If you've ever heard of like gypsy curses, that's the kind of emotions they're supposed to evoke. The lore is really well done. Everything in here fits really well together, and you get a real sense of how the Vistani have survived as long as they have. What did I like about Mordenkainen's Lost Notebook? Well, there's a lot to like. I love the spells, and I love the lore that's behind it. I love reading Mordenkainen's kind of thoughts on picking up these spells and where they came from. I loved kind of the whole concept of it. A notebook from Mordenkainen himself is kind of notes and thoughts about kind of where he found various things and why he did it. It gives you a real insight into Mordenkainen, the person, as well as kind of like what he was looking for as he traveled the plains. And he's gone a very far distance. Mordenkainen is one of those characters that shows up all over the place, especially in all of the D&D modules. He shows up in Barovia, he shows up in the Tomb of Annihilation, more as a reference character rather than him physically being there. But it is nice to see kind of this more, like, almost mundane way he talks about spells. There is also all of the magical items, and I love magical items. They're easier to kind of deal with. They're easier to balance. It's not, you don't have to worry about balance because you just don't give them to your players. And that's the thing, is a lot of them are really interesting in terms of the way they function. A lot of them are like, some of the magical items I really liked was Mordenkainen's Wondrous Stuff. I know it seems like a simple magical item for those who know the book, but basically what it does is it allows you to cast a mending spell. I think of it like a gray goo. Like, there's a apocalypse theory basically goes around something like, if nanobots basically keep going and going and going, they will just convert all of the universe to gray goo. That's kind of what this evokes in my head. Yes, it's repairing things, but oh man, if it gets out of control, it just repair the universe. But what does repair mean? I can imagine a whole theme of adventure. Mordenkainen's Wondrous Stuff gets out of control and thinks that everything should be repaired back to the way it was when the world was new and Abir Toril was one planet, and it tries to restore it. But there's a lot of things like the pouches of shared acquisition I thought was a really cool idea for a pair of twinned thieves that could just wander through town stealing things. One of them gets caught saying, I've got nothing on me, and the other one's got the other stuff in the pocket already. I love these magical items. There's a lot of really great ones here, and again, a lot of them have little banters back and forth. There's a really quick little banter between Mordenkainen and Ashley's character about where his razor has gone, and it goes on a little further. He managed to get this little monocle that's supposed to show him where it's gone, and he doesn't find it, and then he finds this little like secret pocket. Has you checked all your pockets? And he says, no, you've checked all the secret ones, never mind. And I love that. I love that little banter there. I love that little kind of injection of humor, as it were. It's a really great touch to this, and all of the magical items in terms of the componentry to them, and a lot of them also give you something else. A lot of them give you how they're crafted, what it takes to make these magical items. Now, obviously, some of the more complex ones, like the legendary or artifact level stuff, there's no crafting recipe for it. These are items that were born by the gods or through incredible magical convergence. But some of them, like things like the uncommons, commons, and even a couple and a lot of the rares, do have this concept of here's how you make this is what you need, here's how much gold you need. And I love that. I love the giving players ways of making these things, or maybe even peppering the campaign with these componentries and saying, here you go, you know what this is used for. It's used to craft these 4 items. Go and make them if you want. You know how to do it now. You need to spend the gold and the time, and you need maybe to do something like, oh, I don't know, keep a sword in daylight for 24 hours. Good luck with that one. On to what I didn't like. Now, there's not a lot I didn't like. I did think some of the spells are a little unbalanced. Now, a lot of them have to do with bonus action economy and the way they work, and I was like, that might be a little stronger than I think you're intending it to be, and it might be a little too powerful. But on the whole, in terms of the amount of spells, and you get a lot of spells in this book, I think they're okay. The ones that I would take away, maybe lower a little bit, Deadly Pahoehoe, Delay Death, Incendiary Cone, Touch of Vecna, Vecna's Malevolent Whisper, and Black Mantle. Now, most of those, the reason I am a little worried about them is because they're basically, you reduce to 0 and you die instantly. Those spells tend to be very, very dangerous to unleash on a campaign, specifically on the enemy side, because I'm thinking about this both as a DM and as a player. Now, the ones that do this are things like Disintegrate, Finger of Death, and there's a numerous other ones that do kind of like instant death kind of thing. You get to 0 and you're dead if you get hit with one of these. However, we'll say this, most of those spells are also not cones or AoEs. A lot of the ones that I just mentioned are, and they just reduce you to ash and you die. Or they're incredibly difficult to get out of. For instance, Deadly Pahoehoe is basically a cone of lava that essentially goes out and just consumes and wraps people around. A really evocative, interesting spell. However, once it's wrapped around a person, then they need to escape. It's a DC 20 strength check to get out, or you need to do 40 points of bludgeoning damage, and half that damage gets transferred to the person inside. And it's a cone. That might be in the overpower thing. Now, I might give it to a villain. To give it to a player, there's not a lot of creatures out there that could break a DC 20 strength check on their own. And if you get enough creatures in this cone, you're probably looking at wiping out a lot of very difficult high challenge rating monsters that I think some DMs might go, that was a lot easier than it should have been. So maybe something around lowering the damage of it, or potentially making it so that second part of it, the DC for breaking that is a little lower, just so that there's a chance that they'll break out more easily. Or maybe set it to the DC of the wizard that's casting it. Setting it to the wizard's DC is kind of the accepted standard, as it were. It's not usually common that you get a separate DC that isn't related to the wizard's one. So that's just my personal gripe with that specific spell. But there are 60 others. There are like 60 other spells here. So if one spell is overpowered, like seriously so, the rest of them are okay. And I still might even use it as like a major villain as he washes this lava field over these like villagers as they try to get away. Kind of Pompeii style. It's very imagery evocative, and then the players know they have the spell, and it's dangerous as hell. I love that idea. The other thing I will mention is some of the flavor text, like, I love it. I really love reading it. The problem is my eyesight is either going bad or it's a little hard for me to read. I did have trouble reading it even on screens, and I've got stuff that it's in play because I do a lot of work on for my actual job, for accessibility, and I can change things that will make it the best possible way of reading it, and it was still really hard to read. So maybe a slightly different font might be advisable there. One final thing I will say about things I didn't like is I would have loved to see more art in here. I would have loved to see some artistic representations of spells. I would have loved to see artistic representations of some of the magical items. I would have really loved to see an artistic representation of Mordenkainen's staff. Now, I know a lot of this art is prohibitively expensive to commission. Now, I've gone through the good, I've gone through the bad. What do I think overall? Well, I really liked it. I really like the way it's laid out. I really like the fact that there's a lot here. I like the fact that there's a lot of lore here to kind of digest and read through. It's interesting to know where the oil of lasting flame came from. It's interesting to know what Mordenkainen thinks about the deadly Pahoehoe. I love reading about lore like this. It's really interesting to me, and I think it's interesting to a lot of other people. Like, if you look at YouTube, there's tons of lore channels out there, and they all do really, really well. So there must be something to this. And I think anyone who picks this up, especially for the price, it's $9.95. Go pick it up. It's a really great little book that you will really, really enjoy if you love lore, spells, magical items, like any person who plays D&D does. Now, I will say that some of the lore entries are a little hard to read, and I would have loved to see a couple of more art pieces here. So I can only knock it off half a point for that. However, for DM skill, I'm going to rate it a 5 stars. It's really, really great. A really great entry. Maybe make the text in the lore a little bit more readable, and I'm happy to give that half a star back. But thank you. This has been DM Dango. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And please do use my affiliate code if you decide to pick up Mordenkainen's Lost Notebook on the DM's Guild. Thank you, and peace out.